How can an army outnumbered 30 to 1 still win? 800 men against 30,000. They were surrounded, outnumbered. They were supposed to die. And then they did the one thing no one expected. They opened the gates and charged straight into an army 30 times their size, not to survive, but to end it. And then something happened. 30,000 men started running, not losing, running from 800. No one understood it. No one saw it coming. And once it started, no one could stop it. So what did those 800 men do to break an entire army? This war didn't begin with swords. It began with an idea that divided people. In southern France, life was very different from the north. The cities were richer, the culture was more open, people had more freedom in how they lived and what they believed. And that's where the problem started. Many people in the South followed a different form of Christianity. They believed the church had become too powerful, too wealthy, too far from its original purpose. So they chose a simpler way of life. No gold, no luxury, no powerful priests controlling everything. They were called the Cathars. To them, this was the right way to live. To their neighbors, it was normal. But to the church in Rome, it was a threat, because if people stopped listening to the church would lose power. So they made a decision not to debate, not to negotiate, but to destroy it. The Pope called for a crusade, and this time, the enemy wasn't in a distant land. It was inside France. Knights from the north answered the call, but they didn't come only for religion. They came for something else: land, power, opportunity, because every city they captured would become theirs. And slowly, the South began to fall. Cities were attacked, burned, taken. Local lords were forced to choose, submit or fight, and many chose to fight. But they needed help, because this was no longer a small conflict. It was a full invasion. And then a king stepped in, Peter II of Aragon. He was not just powerful, he was respected across the region. He had won battles before, he understood war, and he believed he could stop this. In not just for power, but to protect his allies in the south. So he acted. He gathered an army, not hundreds, thousands, heavily armored knights, infantry from different regions, allies answering his call. This was no longer a local resistance. This was a united force, and their target was clear: a small town, Muret, because inside that town was the man leading the Crusaders, Simon de Montfort. If they could defeat him, they could break the entire crusade. So the army moved, slow at first, then unstoppable. More soldiers joined along the way. By the time they reached Muret, they had become massive. They surrounded the town, cut off the roads, blocked supplies, closed every escape. Inside the walls, Montfort had fewer than 1,000 men, no reinforcements, no help coming. Outside, tens of thousands waited, confident, now relaxed, certain of victory, because this wasn't supposed to be a battle. It was supposed to be the end, a siege. Wait, starve them out, force surrender, simple. And they prepared exactly for that. Set up camps, formed lines, made plans. Everything was under control. Everything made sense. But inside the city, Montfort saw something different. He knew time was not on his side. He knew waiting meant death. So instead of preparing to defend, he prepared to do the one thing no one outside expected. He prepared to open the gates and attack. The warning didn't come all at once. It came slowly. At first, it's just rumors from travelers. An army gathering somewhere far away. More soldiers joining. More banners appearing on the roads. Easy to ignore. But then the messengers started arriving. Not calm, not organized. They rode fast, like they were being chased. Their horses exhausted. Their voices urgent. And they all said the same thing. The enemy was coming, and they were growing larger. Now it wasn't a rumor anymore. It was real. Inside Muret, people could feel it, not just hear it. The town changed. The streets were the same. The houses were the same. But the air felt different, quieter, heavier. People spoke less. Doors closed earlier. Families stayed closer together. Everyone was waiting for something they hadn't seen yet. And then at the center of it all, Montfort remained calm. He didn't react like everyone else. He didn't rush to the walls. He didn't shout orders. He listened, carefully, to every messenger, every detail. How far away were they? How fast were they moving? How many cavalry? How many infantry? He didn't guess. He built a clear picture, and the answer was simple. They were coming fast, and there were too many of them. That's when he made his decision. Quietly, no announcement, no drama. He decided he would not wait, but before anything else, his army had to be ready, and that preparation was everything. He gathered his men, not in panic, not all at once, group by group, so everyone understood. He told them the truth, no lies, no false hope. They were outnumbered. No reinforcements were coming. No one was coming to save them. If they stayed behind the walls, they would slowly lose, food would run out, water would become scarce, strength would fade, and then the enemy wouldn't even need to attack. They would just wait. So the choice was clear. Wait and die slowly, or act and take control. Then the real preparation began. The cavalry was reorganized, not into one large force, but into small, tight groups, each with a leader. Everyone knew exactly what to do. No confusion, no hesitation. They trained movement again and again. How to ride close together, how to hold formation, how to turn without breaking it. Because once they moved, there would be no time to fix mistakes. They trained to strike one point, not spread out, not chase, but focus all force on one target, again and again. Until it became instinct. Speed was trained too, not just riding fast, but moving together. Because speed alone wasn't enough. It had to be precise. Weapons were checked carefully, every sword, every strap, every piece of armor adjusted so it wouldn't slow them down. Even the horses were prepared, well-rested, well-fed, ready for a sudden burst of speed. Nothing was random, nothing was rushed. Everything had a purpose. Even the timing was planned. When to open the gates, how much time before the enemy could react, which direction to move first. Every second mattered, because they would only have one chance. Inside the town, the feeling began to change. The fear didn't disappear, but it shifted. It became focus. People watched the soldiers train, watched them prepare, and slowly, they understood. This wasn't defense, this was something else. Days passed. The news became more urgent. The enemy was close enough to see signs. Smoke on the horizon, dust rising in the distance. And then finally, in one morning, the watchers on the wall saw them. Not a few riders, an entire army, stretching across the fields, rows of soldiers, banners in the wind, armor shining in the sunlight. And still, more kept appearing. Then came the sound, at first distant, then clearer. Horses, voices, movement. The enemy had arrived, and they didn't stop. They moved closer, step by step, until they stood right outside the town, completely surrounding it. No roads, no escape, no delay. And inside those walls, the soldiers didn't panic. They didn't rush, because everything had already been decided. Everything had already been prepared. The only thing left was to open the gates. The army outside Muret didn't rush. They didn't need to. In their minds, this was already over. Their camps spread across the fields like a second city, thousands of soldiers moving freely, armor laid out under the sun, horses resting, tied, feeding. Nothing felt urgent, because they believed time was on their side. They thought the town would break first. Hunger would weaken it. Fear would spread inside. and eventually the gates would open on their own. So they waited, calm, confident, almost careless. Inside the walls, everything felt different. No one spoke loudly anymore. Even small movements felt heavier. You could hear the smallest sounds, metal shifting softly, boots stepping, horses breathing, because everyone knew something was coming, but no one knew when. Montfort didn't announce it, and he let the moment arrive quietly. He watched the enemy, their movements, their habits, their routines. He waited for one thing, a gap, not in numbers, in attention. Morning came slowly, light stretched across the ground. The mist lifted just enough to reveal shapes outside. Some soldiers were still waking up. Some were resting. Some weren't even in formation yet. It wasn't chaos, but it wasn't ready, and that was enough. Inside the town, the signal moved without words. Groups began to form, not all at once, not in a way the enemy could notice. Small movements. Men stepping into position, hands tightening on reins, breathing slowing down. Everything became still, focused. Every soldier knew. Once this started, there was no going back. Then, the gates opened, not slowly, not as a warning, all at once. A sharp, heavy sound, cutting through the quiet morning. And before the enemy could fully react, the first wave burst out. This wasn't a wide charge. It was narrow, controlled, like a spear thrown forward. The horses reached full speed almost instantly, armor rattling, ground shaking, and the distance closed faster than anyone expected. At first, the enemy hesitated. They didn't understand what they were seeing. This wasn't supposed to happen. The trapped army was attacking. That moment of confusion was everything. Montfort's cavalry slammed into the front line. Hard, not everywhere, not random. 1 point, a focused strike. The impact was immediate. Men pushed back, horses collided, lines bent, not broken yet, but shaken, and before they could recover, the second wave hit. Same direction, same speed. Wait, no pause. This time the line didn't just bend. It opened. A gap, small, but enough. And Montfort's men drove straight through it. Now the battlefield changed. The enemy tried to respond. Commands were shouted. Knights rushed forward. But everything felt slow, because they weren't ready. They didn't expect this. Inside the growing chaos, Montfort's men stayed tight. They didn't spread out. They didn't chase easy targets. They moved as one. Strike, pull back, regroup, strike again. Over and over, every attack hitting the same weak point, every strike making the gap wider. Dust filled the air, thick enough to blur vision. Sound became distorted. Shouts, metal, hooves, blending together. Men couldn't see clearly, couldn't hear clearly, and that made everything worse. Because confusion grows faster when you don't understand what's happening. The larger army still had more men, far more, but they couldn't use that advantage, not yet, because they weren't connected, not organized, not fast enough to react as one, and Montfort knew that. That's why he kept the pressure exactly where it mattered, not across the whole army, just one place. Break the center, and the rest would follow. This first phase of the battle wasn't about winning. It was about breaking control, and slowly that control was slipping. But the battle wasn't over, not even close. By now, and the battle was no longer confusing, both sides understood one thing. This was real. The army outside Muret finally reacted. Orders spread quickly, knights regrouped, infantry tightened their lines. They were still stronger, still far greater in number. And now, they were angry, because this wasn't supposed to happen. They weren't supposed to be pushed back, so they pushed forward, hard, from the front, from the sides, trying to surround the smaller force, trying to crush it with sheer numbers. For a moment, it almost worked. The pressure increased fast. Montfort's men were forced closer together. Space became tight. Movement became harder. Every mistake could mean death. But this is where the difference showed. Montfort didn't fight like them. He didn't spread his forces across the field. He didn't try to match their numbers. He controlled direction. Every move had a purpose. Every attack was placed. Instead of holding one line, his cavalry kept moving. They shifted constantly. They would lean toward one side, then suddenly strike another. They didn't stay still long enough to be surrounded. From the outside, it looked chaotic, but inside it, everything was controlled. The key was timing. Montfort waited for moments when the enemy pushed too hard, when they rushed forward without thinking, when their formations stretched too far. That's when he attacked. Fast, precise, always in layers. One group pulled attention, another hit from the side. A third drove through the opening. Not random, connected, each movement building on the last. The larger army tried to adjust. They tried to close gaps and tried to stabilize, but every time they were just a little too slow because Montfort's men were already moving again, never giving them a fixed target, never giving them time to settle. The battlefield became unstable. No clear front line, no solid positions, just constant movement. And that made it hard for the larger army to use its strength because numbers only matter when they move together. Here, yeah, they couldn't, but this wasn't easy, not for either side. Montfort's men were still outnumbered. Every charge cost energy. Every strike carried risk. Horses were tiring. Armor felt heavier. Breathing became harder. Some men didn't get back up. Some fell in the middle of the chaos. And the enemy hit back. Hard. There were moments when Montfort's formation almost broke. Moments when they were pushed back. Moments when it looked like numbers would finally win. But each time, they held. Not by strength, by control, by staying together, by trusting the movement they had practiced. On the other side, the larger army began to feel something new. Not fear, not yet, but pressure, because nothing was working the way it should. They had more men, but couldn't use them all. They had more strength, but couldn't focus it. And slowly, frustration grew. The battlefield changed again. Dust filled the air. Bodies and fallen horses made movement harder. Noise became overwhelming. Orders were harder to hear, harder to follow. And in all of that, both sides were taking losses, real losses, not just numbers, but energy, momentum, control. The battle slowed for moments, then exploded again, back and forth. Neither side breaking, neither side winning, just pressure, constant pressure. And something was building, not visible yet, but growing, because battles like this don't stay balanced forever. And then, the final moment came. By now, both sides were exhausted. The battle had gone back and forth. No clear winner, no total collapse, but something had changed. Not on the battlefield, inside the minds of the soldiers. The larger army was no longer confident. They were frustrated because nothing was working. Every time they pushed forward, they were hit from the side. Every time they tried to regroup, they were broken again. Every time they tried to take control, it slipped away. They still had more men, but they were losing something more important, clarity. And Montfort saw it. He didn't rush. He waited for one moment when confusion became weakness, and then he struck. Not everywhere, just one place. The center, where the command was, where the leaders were, where the king was. Here, Peter II of Aragon wasn't hiding. He wasn't behind the lines. He was in the fight, right in the middle of his men, dressed like them. No crown, no clear symbol. He didn't want to be a target. He wanted to fight like a knight. And for a while, it worked. No one could easily recognize him. But Montfort wasn't searching for a king. He was aiming for the heart of the army, and that's exactly where Peter was. Montfort gathered his strongest cavalry, tight formation, no hesitation. This wasn't another attack. This was the attack. They charged. Fast. Direct. No stopping. No turning. Straight into the center. At first, the larger army didn't react fast enough. They were already dealing with attacks from everywhere. They didn't expect one focused strike, and that delay was everything. Montfort's cavalry slammed into the center. Hard. And this time, the line didn't bend. It broke. The fight turned into chaos. Close. Messy. No space. And in that chaos, it happened. A group of crusader knights broke through. One of them struck. Fast. Strong. Peter II was hit. He fell from his horse. And just like that, the king was gone. No announcement, no signal, just a body on the ground. At first, almost no one noticed. The battle kept going. Men still fighting, still pushing. But then, something felt wrong. Orders stopped making sense. Commands didn't reach the right places. Voices overlapped. Confusion spread. Where's the king? Who's leading? What's happening? And then the truth hit. The king was dead. Not captured, not missing. Dead. And that changed everything. Because the army wasn't just fighting with him, it was built around him. He was the center, the anchor, the one thing holding it together. And now, he was gone. That's when the collapse began. At first, slowly. A few soldiers stepped back, trying to regroup, trying to understand. But without clear orders, they couldn't. Confusion turned into panic. Men began to turn, then run. Not because they were weak, but because they didn't understand. They saw others pulling back, and they followed. The retreat spread, fast, from the center, outward, from one group to another, until the entire army stopped acting as one. Some tried to stand and fight, but they were isolated, pulled back by the movement around them. And Montfort didn't stop. He pushed forward, still controlled, still focused. Driving the collapse deeper, the battlefield changed. No longer a fight, a retreat, then a rout. 30,000 men, no longer an army, just a mass trying to escape. Horses turning away, weapons dropping, lines disappearing, and it all happened fast. Because they didn't lose from weakness, they lost control. Too many men, not enough coordination. When the center broke, everything connected to it broke too. The retreat didn't stop. It kept going, across the field, through their own camps, no one slowing down, because now fear had taken over. And once that happens, it's almost impossible to stop. That is how 800 men broke an army of 30,000. The battle ended in a single day, but what it changed lasted for generations. The South didn't collapse overnight, but after Muret, it was never the same again. The resistance was broken, not completely, but enough. Enough to shift the balance. The crusade moved forward, stronger, more confident, and the world that once existed in southern France began to disappear. The Cathars didn't vanish instantly, but after this, they were no longer protected, no longer strong enough to resist. And slowly, they faded. But the most important lesson wasn't about religion or land. It was about how wars are truly won. Not by numbers, not by size, but by control, by timing, by understanding the exact moment when everything can break. At Muret, 800 men didn't just win a battle. They changed the future in a single charge. And somewhere in that chaos, a king fell. And with him, an entire path of history was lost.